South Sudan is seeing a rise in suicide and suicide attempts following nearly 5 years of brutal civil war that has forced 2 million people to flee into neighboring countries. That's why the UN Refugee Agency and other humanitarian organizations have started a campaign called Operation Hope to prevent suicide and help survivors. Experts believe the negative effect of fighting in South Sudan on civilians' mental health has been staggering.
James Jafar lost everything when fighting began in his hometown Malakal in South Sudan. He and his family fled, seeking refuge in the United Nations Protection of Civilians site. But he struggled to cope. With no job, he was unable to make a living and was soon overwhelmed with anxiety and despair. He attempted to commit suicide, but was rescued by a friend. James is haunted by memories of South Sudan's war. 4 years ago, he and his family were forced to flee.
They were looting phones, laptops, and money. They raped women in front of their mothers and fathers. That's why I decided to run from the town.
They found refuge in a UN compound inside the country. They were safe, but with few jobs and only basic necessities.
When I wasn't able to feed my family, I felt so disillusioned. I was very worried and stressed. I blamed myself. I would come home drunk and quarrel with my wife.
They felt trapped, and overcome with despair, he attempted suicide.
It's difficult to survive in the camp. When I came here, I was so lonely. I realized drinking was not solving my problems. I decided to kill myself. My friend came and forced the door open and rescued me.
James' suicide attempt is part of a larger crisis. Over 4 million people have been displaced since war began in 2013, and over 200,000 people are living in UN sites inside South Sudan.
The economic situation remains a serious challenge for them, and they are now moving freely about like they did before the war, and they are just stagnant. They see life as the end with the current situation they find themselves.
UNHCR and partners are reaching out to young people like James to prevent suicide. Counseling and awareness programs are making a difference. James now volunteers, helping others in despair find a better way to cope.
Today is the International Day of the Girl Child, a day set aside to highlight and address the needs and challenges of girls while promoting girls' empowerment and the fulfillment of their human rights. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, says the world must recommit to supporting every girl to develop her skills, enter the workforce on equal terms, and reach her full potential. Under the theme, With Her, a Skilled Girl Force, International Day of the Girl will mark the beginning of a year-long effort to bring together partners and stakeholders to advocate for and draw attention and investments to the most pressing needs and opportunities for girls to attain skills for employability. Joining us now to discuss more on this is a lawyer and human rights activist, Yvonne Benson Idahosa. Thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Yvonne, the first International Day of the Girl Child was observed in October 2012. 6 years on, how far have we come in highlighting and addressing the needs and challenges of the girl child, especially in Nigeria?
Well, you know, since 2012, I think we've certainly come a long way. The day initially was intended to highlight the need for greater education, medical care, and for legal rights and access to education for girls. I think the campaign has certainly helped to raise a lot of awareness about some of the atrocities that girls, particularly in the developing world and in Nigeria in particular, are facing. It's also provoked a lot of conversations at the government level that have resulted in change. And, you know, it's inspired millions of people all around the world. I think we certainly have a long way to go, but compared to where we were in 2012, life is certainly looking differently for the 1.2 billion girls in the world.
Okay, the theme of today is a skilled girl force. What are some of the obstacles facing the girl child in getting an education and transitioning into the workforce?
I mean, I think the primary thing is just access to education. We know that education is certainly one of the fastest accelerators out of poverty. Of the 1.1 billion girls in the world, 130 million of them do not have access to education. Child marriage is certainly another issue. 12 million girls will be married this year alone. We know that there are certainly issues with extreme poverty. 50% of the women, of the people in the world are women who are living in abject poverty. There's also gender discrimination. There's violence against women. 1 in every 3 women around the world has been forced to have either physical or sexual assault written into her life story.
The abduction of schoolgirls in Chibok, Borno State, and Dapchi in Yobe State by Boko Haram is a clear example of how the girl child's desire for education can be aborted by insecurity. How can the Nigerian government better protect young girls in the country, especially in vulnerable areas, so as to prevent a reoccurrence?
Hearing you.
It seems... Okay.
I can hear you. I can hear you now.
Okay. I said the abduction of schoolgirls in Chibok and Borno State and Dapchi in Yobe State by Boko Haram is a clear example of how the girl child's desire for education can be curbed by insecurity. How can the Nigerian government better protect young girls in the country, especially in vulnerable areas, so as to prevent a reoccurrence?
Well, I think the government first has to decide on what the value of our girls is, right? We know that these economic wars are being fought on the bodies of women and girls who are being used as political pawns in this really twisted game that they never signed up to play. I think the government first has to start to speak the truth about safety, provide adequate security and adequate warnings, particularly to parents who are not in the position of our political elite and of our privilege to be able to just move their families from these areas. I think that when incidents do occur, the government has to be honest and provide information, be transparent, and be accountable. I mean, more than 4.5 years later, we're still wondering what has happened to 112 girls from Chibok. Leah Sharibu is still missing over 200 days later.
Finally, statistics have shown that in most cases, the victims of rape are the adolescent girl child. More shocking is the fact that the perpetrators of these crimes are sometimes loved ones of the victims, like fathers, uncles, religious leaders, and so on. How can this disturbing trend be curbed, and how do we motivate victims of such crimes to heal and carry on? Okay, seems we've lost connection with Yvonne, but still to come on the program. Zambia suspends 80 officials in the Ministry of Education over fraud allegations. Please stay with us.